I had 35 employees, several million in revenue. At some point, I realized that it was making me miserable. There was a major disconnect between the way I was living my life and the way I wanted to model and encourage other clinicians and other professionals to live their life. And I learned that I am not a good manager. I just wanted to get back to a much simpler existence. When I thought about how I could translate my 15 plus years of clinical experience of training thousands of practitioners into some kind of vehicle that could then go out and affect more people, a supplement line made a lot of sense. We even had a rule that our growth would be limited by the number of employees that I wanted to hire.
Balanced life isn't always a good thing. Why is that your position?
Well, there's a saying in Zen Buddhist practice that everything in moderation, including moderation. One of the biggest things for me is to have other interests in my life that I'm very passionate about and engaged in. Things that I care as much or more about than work. Because if I don't, the gravitational pull of work just becomes too great to overcome anything else.
Today on the show, I knew we were going to get into this a little bit, but was even more encouraged as I started chatting with today's guest, Kresser. The tagline, like I just said, incredible businesses, amazing lives. I'm increasingly trying to talk more about that because I think that's really important. And often I'll either ask someone or they'll bring it up as we're chatting before we go on the mic, like, hey, which one of the things you want to talk about? It's important to talk about on this episode. And Chris said, I want to talk about quality of life. And I was like, yes, this is gonna. I already knew this is gonna be a fantastic interview. So Chris is the owner of adaptnaturals.com, Kresser.com. He's a world-renowned functional medicine expert. And we're going to be diving into not just quality of life, but kind of the path that got him there. He started out with a business that was too big for what he wanted out of his life, not in the sense of ambition, but just in terms of headache, overhead, people, and has been incredibly intentional about building a business and a life that is what is important to him and what suits him, and has not done so in a way where I think lifestyle business is probably the wrong term. It definitely is the wrong term, but he's built an incredible business that and reputation for himself online. So I love the fact that this discussion is going to be about building a great life, but also not having to give up your professional ambitions, which I think is often people kind of think comes with the territory. Anyway, I'm doing all the talking here. Chris, so good to have you. Thanks for being here, man.
Andrew, pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. And I want to start before we get into your company that you kind of shut down and changed and pivoted. And before we get into kind of how you're marketing and have become kind of a world-class authority in your topic area. And we'll also geek out about health near the back end of this for people who want to listen. Talk a little bit about, like I mentioned at the top, quality of life. You had this great phrase, I think you said, so many times people think you need to blow off your kids and your family in pursuit of digital excellence, which I might frame that. It's such a good quote. Yeah, give a little thought about like your thoughts on that. You mentioned balance you think is overrated at the same time, which I think is an interesting, given those two go together. But how's that kind of worked out in your life?
Yeah. So there are certain people we all know of out in the metasphere who talk a lot, who produce a lot of content and instructional how-to stuff, social media channels, et cetera, about, how to succeed and thrive as an entrepreneur. And very often the impression you come away with is the way to do that is to work 80 plus hours a week, never be at home with your kids, just constantly be grinding. And I mean, first of all, that just doesn't appeal to me at all. I was never really someone that aspired to that kind of life, even if it meant, great monetary reward or professional success, et cetera. And in part, that was because I had in my 20s, a pretty debilitating chronic illness that really shifted my whole perspective on what was most important in life and provided a pretty good backstop that prevented me from, going beyond what my kind of internal capacity would allow. I had, even after I recovered from that illness, I still, had to be careful. I couldn't push, push, and just keep pushing without a pretty significant consequence on the other side of that. So you often hear people talk about the blessing of an injury or a chronic illness. For me, that's one of the many blessings that came out of that experience for me, is just having a truth teller, on my shoulder, sort of at all times, like, and a powerful reminder when I get too far away from what where my internal compass is guiding me. So throughout my career, I've made an intentional effort to prioritize quality of life above all else. And what that means to me is that the reason I use that phrase is that helping people and being of service is a big driver of my quality of life. Like, that's actually something that makes my life feel like it's worth living, and it's what gets me up in the morning. And so that is included in the way that I think about quality of life. But also, along with that, I include my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my daughter, how I'm able to take care of my body, physical activity, spending time outside, having fun, pursuing other hobbies and interests. Spending time outdoors and in nature is a huge thing for me. It's like really kind of hardwired into my DNA, and I feel like it's a necessity for me to function at an optimal level. And so I have just come to understand that if doing all of those things actually creates if we're to use a marketing term and borrow it, a flywheel, where it that informs my work. It actually allows me to show up for people in my life in a better way. It allows me to be a better clinician, a better educator, and then doing all of those things actually creates the financial circumstances that permit me to have the quality of life that I want to have. So it feels like this virtuous cycle that where you can't really remove any of those pieces and still have that flywheel turning.
Yeah, and we'll get to how long it took you to actually get to a place where you could do that consistently. But you also said, like, you don't like the idea of balance, or maybe that's the wrong way of saying it. Not that you don't like it, but you think that saying a balanced life isn't always a good thing. And oftentimes, I think people hear that, and there's kind of anyone who's been in business kind of has a little bit of a eyebrow raise at that. What is it that you don't? Why is that your position?
Well, there's a saying in Zen Buddhist practice that everything in moderation, including moderation, which is to say that there's the time for extremes, right? And my Zen teacher, Darlene Cohen, who passed away a few years ago, she used to say that balance is overrated, and she would say it with a kind of gleam in her eye. She was very funny. I really appreciated her sense of humor, but she would always ask, balance on what time scale? Are we talking about having to have balance every hour of your day? Does every hour of your day need to incorporate some work, some, self-care, some family time? I mean, most people would say that's ridiculous. Of course not. So what is it one day? Should every day be balanced? Should every week be balanced? What is the time frame that we're targeting for balance? And so I think if we expand the question and think about it that way, like, and when I just look at my own life, there's certainly periods like when I was writing my books, I was in those cases very occupied with my work. And, just I'm the kind of person, when I get involved and interested in something, I dive deeply. And that really, I think, helps me to be productive, and I feel passionate about it, and I think about it all the time, and that feels appropriate and natural to me. But those periods tend to then be followed by a period of extended rest. When I finished my first book, I still had obligations I was doing. I was working in the clinic and seeing patients, but I went down to 2 days a week. And I just carved out a lot of time for rest and spending time with my family and, getting outside and surfing, doing the things that I love. And that just felt like a natural rhythm and flow coming after that intense time. So I would see that as balanced. But if you were to look at my life when I was writing the book, you might not have used the word balance to describe it. So it depends on the time scale, and I think it depends on the person.
I'm envisioning you have a tattoo on your calf that says balance is overrated, quality of life is not. Like if you summed up
Maybe I
Chris's
should get it.
worldview
I
here
have
in
no
one, at
tattoos,
least,
but maybe that would be a
yeah.
good one.
I don't either. When I come to Bend, we'll go have some, some delicious microbrew and go get these tattooed on our
Sounds
legs
good.
together.
We'll
So
make a plan.
bonding experience. Um, what do you really, when you think about that, and this will be the last kind of question before we dive into where you were before you kind of had this all figured out is the wrong phrasing, but before you kind of, because you definitely had an experience with your previous company that I'm guessing drove this to you,
Absolutely. Yeah, we
really
can talk
drove you
about
towards
that.
this philosophy really strongly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is it that you do on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis to really try to, because it's hard. Like anyone that I aspire deeply to quality of life, family time, health, a lot of other areas in my life that are important to me. But it is so easy to let business just take, like business is a hungry monster that is never satiated, right? Like there's always more you can do. There's always more you can improve. It's never ending if you let it be. So how do you not let that take over? And with someone who I'm guessing like me is very interested in your business, it's easy to let that happen. So what do you do to prevent against that?
Yeah. Well, I'll preface this by saying that I realize what I'm about to share is not a strategy that's available to everybody. And I feel very fortunate and blessed that I'm in the position that I'm in and I'm able to do this. And that YMMV, right? Your mileage may vary. So I'll share what works for me with the full understanding that it may not work for everybody else. One of the biggest things for me is to have other interests in my life that I'm very passionate about and engaged in, things that I care as much or more about than work. Because if I don't, the gravitational pull of work just becomes too great to overcome anything else. So let me put it this way: if what I was doing for physical activity was just going to the gym, which I don't mind going to the gym, but I'm not excited about going to the gym. I don't love going to the gym, but I love to ski, for example. And so this morning I woke up early, which is another thing that just comes easily and naturally to me. I realize that's not true for everybody else, but I woke up at 5 this morning, did some meditation, knocked out a couple hours of really focused work, had some breakfast, and then I went skiing for a couple of hours. I love to ski and I'm really passionate about it. And so that draw to do that is enough to pull me away from, maybe I can just stay home and send some more emails, which I might do if I was choosing between that and going to the gym. So at all of the times in my life, like last year when we moved to Bend, I got really into, I started whitewater kayaking, which I'd never done in my life. I'm a surfer, as I mentioned, and I'm living in Central Oregon. So I needed to find some way of interacting with the water in a kind of adventurous fashion. And whitewater kayaking seemed like a great thing to do. So then I get really into it. I watch YouTube videos about it. I get a coach. I'm researching gear. I'm learning as much as I can about the sport. I'm going on, I went on a multi-day raft supported trip towards the end of the season. So I set a goal to build up the skill that I would need to have, including my role and everything, so I could get to the point where I could do that trip. And that gives me something else to focus on outside of work that drives me and really feels satisfying and rewarding and fulfilling. So I always have something like that in my life, and preferably it's outdoor activity related and related to moving my body or something like that. I mean, learning to play the piano, musical instrument, something like that. helps me to, it helps, I guess, if we're going to use the term balance, if you think of like the gravitational pull of work, on one side, I feel like there
Hmm.
has to be something else somewhere else that has equal or greater pull to keep you from getting sucked into that vortex. So that's been a really big piece for me. Um, and I am, I over many years have cultivated quite a bit of discipline around screens and social media and things like that. Like, I don't use social media. This is a confession. I mean, of course, I have Instagram accounts and all that stuff for my business, and I have people who run that for me, but I spend zero time on social media. I spend very little time reading the news. I'm I'm really intentional about where my time goes, because I'm very much aware that there isn't much of it. um, and I want to make sure that I'm spending it in the ways that really align with my values. So I you know I spend time making sure that when I look at my days, that those hours are going to the things that I care about most. And then I'm pretty ruthless about cutting away everything else. So like, I have a kind of quality versus quantity mentality when it comes to friendships, social commitments, any kind of extraneous things in my life that I don't really deeply care about. I tend to let those go or cut them out pretty quickly, and just really leave my energy for the things that are most meaningful to me.
It's cool. Your talk about getting better at whitewater kayaking. Deschutes River in Bend, you've got that great wave in the middle, like the
I
man-made
do.
wave. Were you spending a
Yeah.
lot of time surfing on that thing?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's amazing. For those that don't know, they built a standing wave in the middle of the Deschutes River, and in the part of the river that's right in the middle of town. So I can ride my bike with the board or take my kayak down there, and there's a whole whitewater park that you can go through. It's probably one of the best places to learn to whitewater kayak in the whole country, maybe even the world, for that reason, because you can just do laps going back and forth in that little section.
It's super fun. A couple of years ago, did a road trip, kind of Arizona up the California coast, up to Oregon, over to Montana. And along the way, stopped through Ojai, and a good friend, Derek Dodds, he's a surfer there, went surfing with them. And he was kind enough to give me this surfboard of his, super generous of him. And so continued north, get up to Bend, and was hanging out with a friend in Bend, and went to see the wave. And I thought, I'll bring my surfboard, and commenced to probably have the 4 or 5 most painful
Just
drop-in
eat it.
wipeouts I think that wave has ever seen. Oh,
Wrong board. Wrong
just
board, my friend.
complete. It was rough. I mean, there's definitely other people out there that were making it work. I was not one of them, but
Well,
it
I
was
don't know
fun
if
getting out
anyone
there.
told
And
you. This is a funny thing, because when you're ocean surfing, totally different surfboard than you need for surfing the river wave, because for a few
I
reasons.
did
One
not know
is
that.
salt water is way more buoyant than fresh water. And so, a board that you would ride in the ocean can be relatively thin, relatively narrow, but if you try to stand up on that board in fresh water, it's going to sink. And so the shape of the board needs to be different, and the volume of the board needs to be different. And I think that's probably why you had some big wipeouts, because you didn't have the right equipment.
It's kind of you. I think there would have been big wipeouts anyway. I'm not a great surfer or boardsman, but it was helps my ego maybe a little bit here. There was some
Yeah.
spectacular face first plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, Chris, maybe take us back to, you're in a great place now, it sounds like, and obviously you still got issues like anyone in business problems, but you're prioritizing a lot of things in a very healthy way, it seems like. Where Take us back to your digital training business, what that was, and kind of yeah, paint us a picture
Sure.
of your life back then, please.
Yeah. So I started out just treating patients one on one, like most clinicians, and very quickly realized that there was going to be a hard limit to the number of people I could help that way. I was fortunate to be pretty early in the days of, health blogging and websites. I started my website in 2007, and by the time I graduated, I was still in school. And by the time I graduated, I sent an email out. My practice had a 6-month wait list, so I was very lucky to just be in the right place at the right time, be producing some good, hopefully, content that helped people. And so my practice.
And quick question, because I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to interrupt, but quick question to clarify, because I did a bad job at teeing this up at the beginning. As a clinician, can you give people a sense of what kind of medicine you practice? What kind of doctor?
Yeah, functional medicine. So for those that aren't familiar, I mean, the easiest way to describe it is if you have a rock in your shoe and your foot hurts and you go to the conventional doctor, they'll probably give you painkillers, which, would help with the pain. But in functional medicine, we'll basically tell you to take off the shoe and dump out the rock. I mean, it's a crude analogy, but the idea is we want to get to the root cause of problems and address those so that we're not using unnecessary drugs or surgery, to treat problems that could be addressed through diet and lifestyle changes and other more root cause based interventions. And when I first started, it was pretty early days. Functional medicine has grown a lot. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are now familiar with functional medicine, maybe even have a functional medicine doctor or clinician. But I was, early on, there was a huge demand and there was very little supply. So I constantly had I had an 18-month wait list at one point, which is ridiculous because, if somebody joins the wait list and waits 18 months, who knows what's going on, a year and a half later if they get in to see you. And so that's when I decided after a few years, and I had the experience to do this, to start training other practitioners. So I launched a 12-month functional medicine training course. It was really kind of like a residency or internship in functional medicine. And that was in 2016. And then in 2018, we launched a 12-month health coach training program, functional health coach program, as health coaching started to become more popular, and there was some discussion of it even being incorporated into the health insurance system. We wanted to be able to train people who could go out there and support clinicians and also work one-on-one directly with people on diet and lifestyle change, which is really the most important thing when it comes to prevention and extending health span. And so over time, we trained 600 approaching 700 doctors now in over 30 countries, doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants. We trained over 2,500 health coaches in over 50 countries. I had 35 employees, several million in revenue. And at some point, I realized that it was making me miserable. It was, and I'm still very proud of what I was able to build with that business, and the training program is still going. But I made a decision a couple of years ago to stop the health coach training program and dramatically scale back the clinician training program, because I had built something that just didn't feel sustainable on a number of different levels. And I realized that as much as proud of it as I was, it was there was a major disconnect between the way I was living my life and the way I wanted to model and encourage other clinicians and other professionals to live their life. And so I made the very difficult and quite honestly painful on a lot of different levels decision to unwind that business. And, we, over a period of about a year, we went from 35 employees to 2. And,
Wow.
Stopped doing the health coach training entirely, and then pivoted to launch Adapt Naturals, which we can talk about. So that was a tumultuous period. It also coincided with COVID, and all of the challenges that were happening there in medicine, and it was a pretty brutal transition in many ways, but it was also absolutely the right thing to do. And I have no regrets looking back.
What did you tell people when you were doing that? One thing that I've always known, realizing more and more, and it was kind of a theme at ECF Live this year, is oftentimes as entrepreneurs, we all like to think we do things intrinsically because they're the right things to do. And oftentimes we do things because our ego gets in the way, or we don't want to let people down, or we think this is important. You've got a business that's profitable, you got 40 people. Not only do you have to let the people at your business know, hey, we're wrapping this down, you have to tell people in your life, your family, your friends, you have to explain this to them.
All of the students.
What did you say?
That was the hardest part. We had a huge community, as I said, over 3,000 people we had trained and that were expecting us to be around indefinitely, offering continuing education. And, we had certified them. And so obviously one of their concerns is if they were certified by an institution that's no longer in existence, that would reflect poorly on them. We were, I'm grateful to say, highly regarded in the space. And so there were many people, both students, alumni, prospective students. We had 12,000, clinicians and coaches that were on a kind of interest list, waiting to, potentially to sign up in the future. And none of them from the outside looking in could really understand why, I would make the decision to stop doing that. And there were many layers of the decision. One, and the clinician training program, as I mentioned, is still going, albeit on a smaller scale than it was before. So that I just want to be clear that is still in existence. But the health coach training program stopped, completely. We took about 18 months to fully unwind. We had people in an existing cohort, or two existing cohorts, that we had to see. I made a commitment to see them all the way through, and of course deliver exactly the experience that we had promised to deliver. And we did that all the way through to the end. But I realized that running a school, essentially like a private post-secondary educational institution, was not I didn't feel like that was where I could make the most meaningful impact in terms of how I could help people and long term. And I didn't feel like it was going to ultimately be a sustainable business. And if it wasn't a sustainable business ultimately, then it wasn't, it wasn't going to serve people, the people that were involved with it, both employees and students and alumni. And then third, and equally importantly, I was waking up each day and dreading going to work. And it took me a long time to really come to terms with that, because on paper I had sort of achieved my goals. Like when I set out, I had this vision for creating this, what I call a collaborative practice model that integrated clinical care with a clinician, health coaching, nutrition. And I had created this ecosystem that I had dreamed of creating for so many years, where I was training the clinicians, I was training the health coaches. We had all of this amazing content through my website that we could offer. I had arrived at where I thought I wanted to get to, and yet it wasn't satisfying for me. And I felt disconnected from my own life and from the work itself. I learned that I am not a good manager. I don't enjoy being in a position where I'm managing multiple people. I find that very draining energetically. I feel like I have the capacity to do it, but I just found myself not wanting to do it, not enjoying doing it. I didn't like the dynamics that just inevitably occur when you put 35 or 40 people together in a company under one roof. And I have the deepest respect for people who are able to navigate that and who do that skillfully and who see the value in that, because there's tremendous value in it. But I just, at the end, I just realized that I was not that person, that that's not my path in this life. And I just wanted to get back to a much simpler existence, to be perfectly frank. I wanted to be more of the captain of my own ship, and not have to, as many people, to be concerned about. I wanted to have a smaller scale. This also coincided with my decision to retire from clinical practice and really almost kind of step out, retire from being a public figure. If I'm can even extend it to that, I had before that been on Rogan 5 times. I was doing the book tours and going all around, and I just wanted a quieter life, and one that I felt like I had a more direct and vital connection to my work and to the people around me. And I didn't really enjoy anymore being working at that scale. And so it was a massive downscale in every way and in every aspect of my professional life.
Was there a decision like that is so monumental? Was there a day that you woke up that something happened, or was there a real inflection point where obviously you'd been mulling it, but you woke up on April 4th and you go in and you find out that 3 of your team members have eloped with other team members to Hawaii, and you're like, I'm done. This is what, or was it? It's a terrible analogy or example, but it's the only one I could come up with. Or was it just something where you just woke up one day and it had built up and you just said, that's it, I'm done?
No, it was definitely progressive. I was working with a coach, a professional coach at that point, and we were doing some really deep inquiry and exploration into these questions of like, what is it that I really want? Where is it that I feel I can make the best contribution? What am I being called toward now, even if it's different than what I think I should be called toward, or the way I think my life should look. There was a lot of investigation into, okay, I've arrived at this place that I thought was going to be the that was my goal for so many years, and now I'm just gonna let that all go. Like, what does that mean? Like, why? So there was a lot of soul searching during that time, and it took a while. It was like 18 months of pretty consistent inquiry and investigation. And I had a lot of support, like I mentioned, with the coach and friends and colleagues, and my wife was just there for me, as she always is. And ultimately, I feel like I'm so, looking back on that, I'm so happy with the outcome, and I'm so grateful that I was able to stay in the mess, and not make any kind of reactive or fear-based decisions, and just like stick with it, and through all the grit and the messiness, and until I was able to come out to get clarity.
I want to transition to Adapt Naturals and the business you started that came out of that was much more of I'm guessing, an architected business based on what you knew you didn't want to do. But I can't help but ask, a little rabbit trail here first. You mentioned you went on Joe Rogan 5 times. I don't know anyone that's been on Joe Rogan 5 times. What is the experience like going on that podcast, given the reach of it, the experience? He's such a well-known personality. I guess the question specifically is like, yeah, what's it like going on the show? And then also, what does an exposure like that do for your career and your business?
First of all, I have a lot of respect for Joe. I think he's done a lot for just creating this format of long form conversations between people in a really authentic way. And we see now many other examples of that. I mean, Lex Friedman show and others, that where I think in this time of like sound bites and highly polarized clickbait kind of universe that we live in, just the ability to have people who are just having a very real authentic conversation is so important. And I have really deep respect for Joe for kind of I think pioneering that format. And Joe is behind the scenes exactly as he is on his show. Like I enjoy interacting with him, and he's a great guy. So just the subjective experience of doing the shows was always really fun. Um, the effect was pretty significant. I mean, I've mentioned this to a few people. Like when my first book was published, I went on Dr. Oz, which at that time was by far the biggest health show, like you could go on. If you were a health author, that was the sort of like top tier thing that you tried
Mount
to
Everest.
do. Yeah. If your publicist would get you on Dr. Oz, that was like the top achievement. And, we had like a little bump in book sales after that. But my Rogan appearance was like just blew that so far out of the water. I don't even know. I can't remember the exact statistics, but it was like night and day difference. And at one point, when I was going on his show, like seemed like kind of once a year for a while, or even more frequently, I would say about 30 to 40% of the patients that showed up in my practice were, where you have the little thing on the form that says, "How did you hear about us?" It was, Rogan was like 30 or 40%. And, I had people came to see me from all over the country. So that helped. If it was just a local practice, it probably wouldn't have had as big of an impact. But it was a major, it had a major impact for sure on just the number. I would meet people in the airport and they would say, "Oh, hey, you're Chris Kresser. I saw you on Rogan." That was usually the sort of next thing that came after the "I know who you are" type of thing. So yeah, it was great, and I was grateful for the opportunity to do that.
How did you land that first appearance? Did they reach out to you? Did
He
you
reached
pitch
out
them
to
on
me.
it?
No, he followed me on Twitter and also just read my blog and stuff, was on my email newsletter. And he DM'd me on Twitter one day and said, "You want to come on the show?" I said, "Sure." And I mean, this was way back, like in long before he went to Spotify, when he still had his own show. And I was on there a couple solo episodes, like where he just interviewed me. And then I did 3 debates. He was really into having me debate people, particularly vegan and plant-based diet people. And
I caught
after
one
the
of those.
third
Yeah,
one of
it looked
those, I
intense.
was like, I'm done with these. Like I've said what I have to say on this subject, and I don't want to become the Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, kind of like omnivore proponent versus vegan. Yeah, I don't want to be just that guy. So I stopped doing those debates.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, painted the picture for what you came out of. You took a little time off, it sounded, between when you went on the first company, and then talk a little bit about Adapt Naturals and how that came about. And if I'm guessing you were highly intentional about how you built that, but if you could talk, about the origins of your next company, which had a very strong framework.
Yeah. So, of course, as a functional medicine clinician, I use supplements extensively in my practice. And it was kind of a running joke over the years of like, gosh, I should really just make my own supplement company. When it came time, when I started to unwind the training business and think about what might be next, that collective experience of myself and many of the clinicians that I trained, just not finding exactly what they were looking for, was certainly one of the driving factors for starting Adapt Naturals. But another one was that I've always had the bias in my career of how can I affect the largest number of people with my work. And so, when I first started, it was just treating people one-on-one. Then it was writing a book. Then it was starting to train doctors and other practitioners. Then it was starting to train health coaches. And each one of those you could see as like a ring expanding out from the center of a concentric circle that would hopefully take this work to a wider audience and a broader um, demographic of people. Because the reality is with functional medicine, it's phenomenal, but only a very small percentage of people can afford it because it's not integrated into the healthcare system. A lot of people, it's largely out of pocket. Some expenses are covered, but others aren't. And, so even training other doctors to do functional medicine was important and helpful, but it wasn't going to ever really impact a super broad number of people because of that, at least with the way things are set up now. Health coaching had the potential to impact more people because it's more affordable and it takes less time to train someone to be a health coach than to train someone to be first a doctor or a clinician and then get functional medicine training on top of that. But it still is something that is out of reach for a lot of people, but many people can afford to buy a multivitamin or a colostrum supplement or an omega supplement or something like that. And it can make a meaningful impact on people's lives. And we see this in all the reviews of our products. And so this was a way that when I thought about how I could translate my 15 plus years of clinical experience of training thousands of practitioners into some kind of vehicle that could then go out and affect more people, a supplement line was made a lot of sense. And that combined with my own experience with all of the pain points of using supplements that I had gone through, both myself as a patient, as a person, as an individual seeking to improve my own health, and as someone who had spent all those years treating patients, it just seemed like a pretty natural fit.
How did you create the business in a way that it did not become a monster that you were running from, right? Because you had just gotten out of this thing that you do very much you didn't want to do. And I think this one took off. I'm remembering, you were within 10 months, you were in the mid 7 figures in revenue. You had, I believe, 6 full-time employees. I might be getting that wrong, but a business like this has just as much potential to come and turn into what you didn't want it to. So how did you think about that as you were starting it?
Yeah, actually, I still have only 3 full-time employees, and we're significantly ahead of that now in terms of the growth that we've had. So there was a lot of intention, as you noted. I was hyper aware of, let's say, of not wanting to go from the frying pan to the fire, or just like solve one problem and create a whole bunch of others for myself. And so I was very deliberate. Early on, I joined ECF, which I have to say was a very great decision, one of the best decisions I made. And because I knew intuitively that there's a universe of people out there who are way ahead of me in terms of, who've already figured this out, or at least are further down the path of figuring this out. And they've already experienced and in many cases overcome a lot of the challenges and problems that I know I will be facing as I walk down this road. And I don't need to reinvent the wheel here. And this is, to be fair, this is one of the things that was attractive about e-commerce versus what I was doing with education and training. We always felt like with education and training, we were making it up as we went along, because we were. There wasn't a template to follow. And this goes all the way down to things like, we basically had to build the platform for delivering the content. Yes, there are off-the-shelf platforms, especially now, for delivering educational content. But when we were starting, none of those worked for what we needed to do. So we had to put it, together with chewing gum and toothpicks and, take an off-the-shelf solution and build it. And whenever we had a problem to solve, there wasn't a whole universe of people out there who had seen that problem and then built solutions to it, like there is in e-com. And so my strategy from the beginning was, first of all, to look out there, survey the marketplace, and identify some companies that I really admired and that had built, had achieved what they had achieved in a way that was, that at least from the outside looking in, was similar to what I imagined I wanted. So I didn't look at companies that were venture funded and that had grown from like 0 to 50 million in a few years, because I know just from enough experience what that looks like on the inside. I knew that taking outside money and growing at that rate would make my life miserable. So I completely ruled that out from the beginning. No venture, no outside funding, no equity financing. I would put my own money into it or get debt financing. I would not take any money from anyone else that would then be my boss. So that was a decision that I made from the outset. I was very clear about that. I looked at other businesses that had grown organically. And I'll say, I don't mean just purely from organic marketing, but I mean a kind of organic level of growth that wasn't fueled by outside capital, and that was based more on just the quality of their products, word of mouth, and paid advertising, but paid advertising done in a way that is not putting excessive cash flow stresses on the business in terms of inventory and cash flow to the point where you would then need to go and get outside financing and capital. I knew that I wanted to be extremely lean because of my previous experience with having a business with almost 40 full-time employees. And we even had a rule that we couldn't grow that our growth would be limited by the number of employees that I wanted to hire in a particular time. And so I would make explicit choices about, okay, if we go down this road, will I have to hire more full-time employees? And if the answer is yes, then the answer to that growth strategy is no, basically. And I also knew that I wanted to be profitable almost like as soon as possible. And we were profitable in the somewhere between the second and third month. And we have been profitable ever since then. And that was an explicit choice for all the reasons that I mentioned before. So I had all of these constraints that I imposed upon myself that I figured if I stuck to them, I would end up with the kind of business that I really wanted to have, and that supported the direction that I had chosen to go to go in after I unwound the other business.
Yeah, it's so funny with e-commerce. And e-commerce is full stop hard. You have to know product, you have to know marketing, it is challenging, if not extremely challenging. But I'll also say a lot of times it's easy to say the grass is greener on the other side, right? And, if we could only have SaaS, but having talked to SaaS owners who have done SaaS and e-commerce, definitely some on the SaaS side, but some will say that e-commerce is their preferred choice, because with SaaS, you've got API calls, you've got things that break, you have developers, your cost for talent is extremely expensive. It's less templatable, as you were talking about. And also, I love your constraint on full-time employees. When I hear people, at least from a growth perspective, when I hear people who are growing crazy quickly and they're like, hey, we added 20 people this quarter, my head just explodes. I mean, I am not a strong hirer. It takes me a long time to do that. But I'm just like, I don't know how you can hire that many people without a lot of not great fits coming into the organization, unless you've got like 5 or 6 hiring managers working full stop, which I'm guessing most people don't. So I love that as a constraint for growth. I think that's super cool.
I think it brings a lot of different things together. If like you said, if you're hiring that quickly, what's the quality, what's the fit and alignment going to be? And then just your ability to manage that number of people and make sure that you're still guiding the company in the direction that you want to go in. I think it was very, and I don't remember where I read this. I read some article just about how the Silicon Valley model of growth with SaaS, where incremental growth is a function of just a button click, right? Like another Dropbox subscription sold. And you can have explosive growth there in a way that you can't really have in ecom, in a physical product ecom business, without a whole lot more of a mess. But this Silicon Valley model of growth, I feel like, has been rubber stamped onto e-commerce and physical and businesses that carry inventory and physical products, such that almost everyone I know, especially, well, a lot of people I know in the world of e-commerce, there's sort of like a default assumption, like, okay, I'm going to start an e-commerce business. That means I'm going to come up with a business plan and a pitch deck, and then I'm going to go out and raise some money. And then I'm going to start, it's just like this a set of assumptions that I feel like a lot of people haven't even questioned, because it's just become the default way that you do things. And then, of course, that really alters the trajectory of that business, because when you have outside funding, you're going to make decisions differently than if you didn't have outside funding and you're only spending your own money and you have to be profitable. You're going to think twice about certain things that you might not think twice about if you have outside funding. And then, of course, you have to you have to step on the gas a lot more than you would if you didn't have outside funding. So it's not all about that variable, but I feel like the decision very early not to do that and just be profitable and to fund our growth with our own profitability. And then the other one was to not target an exit on a specific time, and just to build the most profitable, successful business that I could. And that if that gets us to a point where exit makes sense, great. But if it just ends up being a situation where the business is generating an enormous amount of EBITDA and cash flow and helping a lot of people and requires not very much of my time and input, and we have only a handful of employees, then I'm perfectly happy with that as an outcome as well. And to me, that feels like a more sustainable path for most people than starting off with the idea of a big exit in mind from the get-go.
I love how you built it too, because I've talked about this a few times in the past on the podcast, but I really think we're coming into this era of what I call smaller, more sustainable, not sustainable, smaller, more durable brands. And because you have so much more competition now than you had even 5 years ago. So that does two things. One, it means your acquisition costs are much more. Like, we're in the middle of a month with a lot of people on Meta recording this in, late March of 2024. But there's a lot of people right now who are really having a hard time with Meta, and it's becoming, for some people, an existential crisis, which is tough. And I feel for them. But it's things are getting more. This is maybe because Facebook has something's broken internally, but kind of speaks to the higher point that, like, if acquisition costs on Facebook are so high and that kills the business, that's going to only increase happening. It's happening on Amazon, it's happening on Facebook, it's happening everywhere. So I think you've got to, increasingly, businesses are having to earn their business the old-fashioned way, like phenomenal products, word-of-mouth marketing that can either go organically or naturally just help make for great ad copy that makes your CPAs lower when you do use paid. And then also being lean, like, going back a couple of years, but in the studies I've done, some of the best, most profitable companies aren't the ones that have the most ROAS and the highest ROAS. They're the ones that are the operationally most efficient. Right. Yeah. And you've done this so well on both. And to your marketing too, like, you haven't been building this company for 2 or 3 years. Like, you've been building the asset base and reputation to help you build it for 15 plus years. Right. And that's something that you'll be able to grow with.
I definitely want to acknowledge that. Like, some people that I talked to have said, "Oh my God, how did you get from from zero to where you are in 18 months?" And I was like, it wasn't 18 months. It was, close to 18 years, really. And so I just want to be totally upfront about that. Like, I don't think that I'm some kind of business genius that was able to launch this brand and bootstrap it with no outside funding from zero to where we are. But I spent 15 years building a reputation and a brand. And honestly, in those first 10 or 12 years, I didn't sell anything. I was just writing articles and had an email newsletter and ebooks. Everything was free. And I'm not suggesting that as a business
Mhm.
strategy. It was just that wasn't how I made, it wasn't how I made money. I saw patients, and then I trained doctors, but I had this enormous consumer audience that, 90% of the people on my email list were not doctors or healthcare practitioners of any kind. So I had no product to sell them. I just built a relationship with them over time. And I think, some of the best feedback I've gotten is just that people trust me, and they trust that they trust my motives, and they trust that I will say that I was wrong when I was wrong. And when new information comes to light, I change my mind. And, so I built a relationship with people, and I built trust over time, so that when I did launch this supplement brand, there was an immediate kind of, there was immediate trust there. Like, people who'd followed me for a long time were just happy to be able to buy a product that I made myself, because they trusted me to do it. And so I just want to be totally real about that. Like, it's not a strategy that can necessarily, be easily replicated overnight.
Oh, and my point was that was not a hit at all. It was more of a point to just, I think it takes longer to run up for these smaller, more durable brands.
Yeah.
There's more upfront investment. There's more spin up time. They don't grow as quickly. But once you have them, like you have a following now in this business that you have, I'm guessing a huge percentage of your customers come, again, from those people who know you, who trust you, have heard you over the last 10 years. You have an incredibly durable brand that you've built now because you put in the work, and you couldn't have built this in 2 or 3 years, but you also have something that's much stronger than what many people would build in 2 or 3 years, even with a lot of venture funding. So I'm curious, you said you have 3 full-time employees right now.
Mm-hmm.
And given that you are so focused on operational efficiency, low overhead, what do those 3 employees do? Like, where do you focus that laser beam of effort?
Yeah. So one is e-com director. And so he handles everything related to the Shopify store. So new product pages, new landing pages, adding new products, looking at AOV, conversion rate, everything related that goes into selling the products online is his domain. And he also handles email marketing. I think one of our superpowers is email, and that is in part because we have 15 years of experience using email for digital, for the healthcare training programs, and a lot of those skills are transferable, right? So different products, but we know how to talk to people with email. And he had that role at my previous education and training business, and so I brought him over when we launched Adapt Naturals. The second person, and this is relatively new, this was because when I first started, I had two employees, and so this third person is supply chain analyst. So we have enough products now and enough complexity in our supply chain. We use 100% compostable stand-up pouches for our products now, which I'm very proud of. As a lifelong surfer and outdoor and wilderness enthusiast, it was really important for me to not have plastic bottles and be contributing to that problem. And the downside of that is that the supply chain for those pouches is quite complex. There are a lot of moving parts, and adds a lot of difficulty to the business. So she's in charge of sourcing the pouches, making sure we are always in stock with those and can get those to the co-man. And then also we have 2 different co-mans, one for powder and capsules and one for gels and liquids. And she manages that whole side of things. And then the third person is social media manager and also influencer sources. So you mentioned earlier, like this concept of word of mouth and more durable business. One of our, aside from paid media, our biggest channel for acquisition is influencer marketing. So, some AKA affiliate or partner marketing, whatever you want to call it. And that's an area where we've been able to leverage just my credibility in the field and reach out to people, and sometimes now we're getting inbound inquiries about people wanting to promote Adapt Naturals, and so she handles a lot of the sourcing of those people, communicating with partners, helping to organize the promotional campaigns and all of that stuff. To be perfectly honest, we could probably get by with a part-time person or a contractor in that role, but she came over from my previous business, and she's such an A plus player that I didn't want to lose her. So I sort of carved out a full-time role for her, even when one didn't necessarily exist. And I'm really glad that I did, because she's just totally thrived in this role. So those are the full-time roles. And this is probably a good brief segue to saying, I think that another thing that was enormously helpful to me in the beginning was, and this is something that I feel like that I'm pretty good at, that I've learned over time, is how to seek out and find the best people to do whatever it is that needs to be done. So, and you'll understand when I say that I have Andrew Ferris running paid ads for me, and Bill D'Alessandro is my contract CFO consultant. So, both of them really well, and they are incredible. And very early on, I identified them and was exposed to them through the ECF community, and just kept reaching out to them. And now they're part of the Adapt Naturals team, not employees, of course, but just in a kind of partnership method. And I attribute a lot of our success to having the collective wisdom and insight of those two guys, and their background and experience, and being able to work with both of them together has been incredibly helpful and fun. They're both amazing people. So I just actually met with Bill before we hopped on here, and had a meeting with Andrew yesterday. So it's been a pleasure to work with them, and I attribute a lot of our success to working with both of them.
That's cool. Yeah, they're both fantastic guys. You mentioned email, and the email is such a huge driver for you. Are you still seeing it perform just as well as it has in the last 2-3 years? Have you seen a drop off in terms of how effective it has been for you? I feel like email is such a great channel for those who invest in it over the long term, but inboxes are, in perpetually getting more crowded. So how are you seeing that continue to perform over time? And what are the couple of things you really focus on to nail the email channel?
Well, Adapt Naturals is less than 2 years old, so I can speak to our experience for as long as that business has existed, and then I can speak to my longer term experience of email with the training business and just my online platform, chriskresser.com. Certainly, we, like everybody else, were affected by the iOS changes, and just inboxes getting more crowded. And but what I would say is that I think the reason, we have seen no decrease in email since we launched Adapt Naturals. In fact, email has just only continued to increase. It accounts for 40% of our revenue, so it's an enormous channel for us. And I think that one of the things that has made it successful for us is just the experience that I had previously, and just what I was just referring to a few minutes ago is building a relationship with people. We send out emails that aren't promotional emails. We send emails with links to some of my blog articles that are just like genuinely useful information that we think will be helpful for people. And I think that doing that, this isn't any earth-shattering revelation that other email marketing experts don't talk about, but I don't see that many people doing it. And we do that. And I think it has been a key to our success, because people actually feel that the emails we send are valuable, and not just us promoting and trying to sell a product. And I think that's made the biggest difference for us.
40%. That's crazy and amazing. Well done on that. The comfort that gives to have shy of getting blacklisted, which is a possibility, I guess, but I'd much rather roll the dice with my own email versus Meta or Instagram or whatever it is.
It also is a lot cheaper than Meta and Instagram to send an email.
Yes. Well said. Chris, I have a ton of other stuff I'd love to talk to you about, but we'll have to do it either on the ski hill or at the wave in Bend at some point. This has been phenomenal. Thank you. Thank you for going into your story. I love your philosophy and your approach to life and business. I think it's super admirable. And then I am, if I had to sum up my obsession with the balance between business and professional work, is trying to be able to have both and have your cake and eat it too. And I think as much as anyone I've seen, you've done an incredible job of that with fulfilling a professional ambition, but also being really intentional about not letting that, tear into your quality of life. I tell people, you mentioned adaptnaturals.com. We've been talking about it throughout, but give people a quick sense. What kind of supplements do you sell there? Who can you help out? If somebody's listening, who should go over there? I already am thinking I've got a list of supplements I take from my doctor that I'm going to go convert over from script to you here this next week. Who else should be listening? Who can you help over there?
Yeah. So it's really a similar approach that I took as a clinician. It's a root cause based approach. The idea is that the best way to use supplements is to address underlying issues and mechanisms so that a whole bunch of different symptoms and things will improve rather than using them in a Band-Aid fashion. So that's the thought process that I use when I formulate products. And so I formulate products that typically that are multi-purpose rather than just one specific use. So we have a multivitamin, of course. There's nutrient deficiency is a widespread problem even in the developed world and even for people who are eating a healthy diet. So it's a whole food based multi with vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. So it's like taking a multi and a reds and a greens powder in one. We have an organ supplement. I'm sure a lot of people have been exposed to Liver King and the truth, what he's right about. There are a lot of things that are a little bit questionable there, but he is right that liver is the most nutrient dense food we can eat, along with other organ meats. And most of us don't consume organ meats in our day-to-day routine. And so this is a great way to get organs. We have a blend of 8 superfood mushrooms, including reishi, chaga, lion's mane, turkey tail. We have a omega supplement that includes curcumin and black seed oil, which are both potent anti-inflammatories. Also support mood, cardiovascular, metabolic health. It's a great 3-in-1 product. I mentioned before how I was frustrated that you had to take all these different separate products for the same goal. So I've built a few products like this. We have a colostrum supplement that includes lactoferrin and beta glucan, which are powerful gut and immune nutrients. And then our newest product that we're coming out with in a couple of weeks is called Luminous Mind. It's a nootropic for cognitive function and mood, and it's sort of like the unfair advantage I wish I had 20 years ago for everything from focus, attention, alertness, creativity, and it's caffeine free. So that's exciting, and it should be out by the time this podcast goes live, I would imagine.
Very cool. Well, we will come out in the next few weeks. We'll link up to that in the show notes so you can check that out, or just head over to adaptnaturals.com, and I'm sure it won't be too hard to find. So
that's probably the one.
Chris, thank you so much, and also thank you.
Most interested in is Luminous Mind. Anyone who's running a business or trying to stay sharp all day, that's it for sure.
Supercharge your brain. Also, thank you for it's been great having you in the community. You've been a phenomenal contributor, phenomenal member, and it's just been wonderful having you there and wonderful having the chance to kind of go deep and hear more about your story and learn about you. So we'll have to do another episode at some point in the future, actually get into the nutrition side, the supplement side, the email marketing side in more depth. But we're gonna call it here. But thank you so much. Really, really deeply enjoyed this. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you, Andrew, for the opportunity. I enjoy the conversation, and I love the community you've built with ECF Live. I know firsthand how much work goes into building a community, and one especially where there's so much mutual respect and just a real ethic of people helping each other out and being like rising tide lifts all boats, and I really feel that in ECF Live, and I think that starts from the top. So kudos to you for doing that, and it's been an enormous help for me, and like I said, it exposed me to so many people that I've become good friends with, and they've become colleagues, and have helped Adopt Naturals to thrive. So thank you for that.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate it.